Right, so get this. The U.S. government's creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve.
Yeah.
Like we're talking about a digital Fort Knox, but instead of gold,
Right.
Bitcoin.
Hmm.
It's a pretty bold move, don't you think?
It is. What's so fascinating is that this isn't just about, like, dabbling in crypto.
Yeah.
You know, the government's pulling Bitcoin from assets that were seized in criminal and civil proceedings.
Oh, wow.
Forfeiture proceedings. And they already hold 198,109 Bitcoin.
Wow.
That's like, what, $17 billion at current market prices?
Oh, my gosh.
So this signals a deliberate strategy, not just a speculative investment.
So it's not like they're just dipping their toes in the water. They're going all in.
Yeah, they're diving in head first.
Yeah, and with a significant amount of Bitcoin, and what's even crazier is they're not planning on selling any of it.
Yeah.
They're holding it as a long-term store of value.
Exactly.
Just like gold in Fort Knox.
Like, think about what a strategic reserve usually means. We're talking about things like oil or gold, commodities that are essential for national security or economic stability.
Right.
By applying that same logic to Bitcoin, the government's essentially saying they see it as having a similar level of importance.
Okay, so I can't help but think about that digital Fort Knox analogy a little bit more. You know, we all know Fort Knox is shrouded in mystery and intrigue. Does this move suggest that the government sees Bitcoin as like a key player in the future of finance?
Yeah.
Maybe even a potential threat to like traditional systems?
It's certainly a possibility. I mean, Fort Knox evokes images of security and longevity.
Yeah.
It's a powerful symbol, and applying that to Bitcoin definitely adds a layer of intrigue.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, especially considering that the government's exploring ways to acquire even more Bitcoin.
Wait, really? How are they planning to do that?
Well,
didn't they say this whole thing had to be budget neutral?
Yeah.
Meaning no taxpayer money involved?
That's the catch, and it's where things get really interesting. They've been pretty tight-lipped about the specifics, but it raises some fascinating questions.
Yeah.
Will they explore partnerships with private entities? Could we see new legislation that allows for the acquisition of Bitcoin through other means?
Right.
It's a puzzle worth pondering.
Definitely. And this is just Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Remember, the executive order also calls for a U.S. digital asset stockpile, encompassing other cryptocurrencies besides Bitcoin. I have to admit, I'm a little fuzzy on the difference between a reserve and a stockpile.
Yeah, it is confusing, and some of the initial reporting didn't help.
Yeah.
They were using the terms almost interchangeably.
Okay.
But it seems like they are two distinct entities, one specifically for Bitcoin, the other for a broader range of digital assets seized by the government.
So two separate entities, both holding digital assets. It's like they're building a whole digital vault for the future. And if they're already planning to acquire more Bitcoin, what's stopping them from expanding that digital asset stockpile as well?
That's a great question, and it gets to the heart of how the government views the entire cryptocurrency landscape.
Yeah.
Are they acknowledging the potential for a multifaceted digital economy?
Right.
Are they preparing for a future where digital assets play a much larger role? This move certainly suggests that's a possibility.
This all feels like a huge shift. I mean, just a few years ago, Bitcoin was considered this niche thing, maybe even a bit shady.
Yeah.
Now the U.S. government is creating a strategic reserve for it. What kind of message do you think this sends to the rest of the world?
It's definitely a signal that the U.S. is taking digital assets seriously.
Yeah.
But it also raises a lot of questions about how this will impact the global financial landscape. Will other countries follow suit and create their own reserves?
Right.
Could this spark a new kind of digital arms race?
Wow.
It's definitely a development worth watching closely.
You know, with President Trump hosting a digital asset summit, this is clearly just the tip of the iceberg.
Absolutely.
This deep dive is only scratching the surface. We've got a lot more to unpack.
Yeah.
So let's move on to part 2, where we'll dig deeper into the potential implications of this move.
Sounds good. So picking up where we left off, it's crucial to understand what the creation of this strategic Bitcoin reserve and the digital asset stockpile could mean for the future of finance, you know?
Yeah.
We're potentially seeing a seismic shift in how governments approach currency and assets.
Yeah, it really does feel like we're standing at the edge of something big. And, you know, it's not just governments that are paying attention.
Right.
We're seeing a surge of interest. from businesses and everyday investors who are starting to see the potential of digital assets.
You're absolutely right. And this brings us to President Trump's Digital Assets Summit, which, could be a pivotal moment in shaping the future of this space. This gathering of, key players in the industry signals just how high digital assets are on the agenda.
Okay, so let's talk about the summit. I'm particularly interested in the regulatory aspect.
Okay.
We know figures like David Sachs, the White House AI, and CryptoNews have been pushing for a clearer regulatory framework. What do you think will be the main focus of these discussions?
I think you're spot on about regulation being a central theme. Finding the right balance between fostering innovation and protecting investors is crucial.
Right.
And it's something governments around the world are grappling with.
Yeah.
The summit could be a critical step towards establishing a clearer regulatory landscape in the U.S., which would likely have ripple effects globally.
It's interesting to think about the potential outcomes of this summit. Could we see a scenario where the U.S. emerges as a leader in the crypto space, setting a precedent for other nations to follow? Or could we see a more fragmented approach,
right,
where different countries adopt their own regulations, potentially creating a complex and challenging environment for businesses operating in this space?
Those are both very real possibilities, and the outcome will likely depend on the level of collaboration and consensus that emerges from these discussions. There's a lot at stake, not just for the U.S., but for the global financial system as a whole.
And, while we're talking about historical parallels, I can't help but think about the move away from the gold standard back in the day that was a huge turning point in global finance.
Yeah.
Could Bitcoin or even digital assets as a whole potentially play a similar role in the future?
Yeah.
Could we be headed towards a world where traditional fiat currencies are challenged or even replaced by digital alternatives?
Yeah, that's a question that has sparked countless debates among economists and policymakers.
Right.
It's certainly a bold idea and one that's gaining traction as the crypto space continues to evolve. Whether or not it becomes a reality remains to be seen.
Yeah.
But the possibility itself is forcing us to re-examine long-held assumptions about money,
Right.
finance, and the role of governments.
It's mind-blowing to think about how quickly things are changing just a few years ago. The idea of a government creating a strategic Bitcoin reserve would have seemed like science fiction.
Yeah.
Now it's a reality. What other unthinkable developments might we see in the next few years?
That's what's so exciting about this space. The pace of innovation is incredible. It's forcing us to expand our thinking and imagine possibilities that were previously inconceivable.
Right.
And as we continue to explore the potential of digital assets, we're bound to encounter even more surprises and paradigm shifts along the way.
We've talked about the what and the why of the strategic Bitcoin reserve, but I think it's time to delve into the how.
Yeah.
How does this digital Fort Knox actually function in practice? I'm picturing a giant high-security server farm somewhere with rows upon rows of computers humming away, safeguarding the government's Bitcoin stash.
That's a pretty accurate image, although maybe not as dramatic as you might think. Remember, Bitcoin exists on a decentralized network.
Right.
So it's not like they're storing physical coins in a vault. Right.
They'll be using secure digital wallets, similar to those used by individuals, but with an entirely different level of security and oversight.
Okay, so let's talk about those wallets. How do they work? And what kind of security measures are we talking about here?
Right.
I mean, this is a huge amount of Bitcoin we're talking about.
Right.
The stakes are pretty high. Okay, so let's talk about those wallets. How do they work, and what kind of security measures are we talking about here? I mean, this is a huge amount of Bitcoin we're talking about. The stakes are pretty high.
You're absolutely right. The security of these wallets is paramount. Imagine them as digital vaults, each protected by a unique set of cryptographic keys.
Okay.
These keys are essentially long, complex codes that grant access to the Bitcoin stored within.
So it's like a super high-tech combination lock, but instead of numbers,
Right.
it's this incredibly complex code. Exactly. And the beauty of this system is that these keys can be split and stored in different locations, making it virtually impossible for a single entity to compromise the entire reserve.
Yeah.
Think of it like pieces of a puzzle.
Right.
You need all the pieces to unlock the full picture.
That makes sense. It adds another layer of security. But I'm still curious about how this whole thing is managed. Is there a team of government agents constantly monitoring these wallets, making sure everything is secure?
There's definitely a dedicated team responsible for the management and security of these digital assets. And they're not just sitting there watching screens all day.
Yeah.
They're working with cutting-edge technology, implementing multi-factor authentication, robust encryption protocols, and constant monitoring to safeguard against any potential threats.
This is something out of a spy movie.
Right?
All these high-tech safeguards protecting billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin. But with all this talk about security, I can't help but wonder about transparency. How can we be sure that the government is actually holding the amount of Bitcoin they claim to be holding?
That's a valid concern, and it's where blockchain technology comes into play. Remember, Bitcoin transactions are recorded on a public immutable ledger.
Right.
While the government's specific wallet addresses might not be publicly known, there will likely be mechanisms in place to allow for independent audits and verification of the reserve's holdings.
So there's a way to track the movement of Bitcoin, even if we don't know exactly where it's being held. That's reassuring. But let's shift gears for a second and talk about the potential impact of this reserve on the Bitcoin market itself. The U.S. government is now a major holder of Bitcoin. What does that mean for the price and overall stability of the cryptocurrency?
It's a question that has many experts speculating. On one hand, you could argue that increased demand from a major player like the U.S. government could drive up the price of Bitcoin. But on the other hand, it could also introduce a new level of volatility, especially if the government were to ever decide to sell off a portion of its holdings.
So it's a bit of a double-edged sword, increased legitimacy, but also potential for market manipulation. It's almost like the government is playing a high-stakes game of chess with the future of finance. But I'm curious about the long-term implications if this strategic Bitcoin reserve is successful. Could it pave the way for other countries to follow suit? Could we see a future where Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies become integral parts of national reserves around the world?
It's definitely a possibility, and it would fundamentally change the global financial landscape. We could see a shift away from traditional reserve currencies like the US dollar towards a more diversified system where digital assets play a prominent role.
It's amazing to think about how far we've come in such a short time, from the early days of Bitcoin being seen as this fringe, almost underground technology,
Right.
to now having governments building strategic reserves around it. What a wild ride.
It's a testament to the power of innovation and the unwavering belief of those who saw the potential of a decentralized digital future. And it's just the beginning. As we continue to explore the potential of digital assets, we're bound to encounter even more groundbreaking developments that will shape the financial world for generations to come.
Wow. I think we've officially given our listeners a lot to think about today. It's clear that the creation of this strategic Bitcoin reserve is more than just a headline-grabbing news story. It's a potential turning point in the evolution of finance. Who knows what the future holds? Maybe one day we'll all be transacting in Bitcoin, reminiscing about the days when it was just this weird niche thing that only a handful of people understood.
One thing is for certain, this is a story that's still being written. And it's a story that has the potential to reshape the very foundations of our economic world. So keep your eyes open, stay curious, and who knows, maybe you'll be a part of writing the next chapter.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explore the fascinating world of Bitcoin strategic reserves and the future of finance. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.
As always, subscribe to our channel, like the video, and comment below. There are also some links in our description that you may find useful. See you in the next episode. Bye-bye.